Arizona Territory, 1885. A woman clutches a letter in her gloved hand as she steps down from a mud-spattered stagecoach into the harsh midday sun. Rebecca Matthews shields her eyes, scanning the desolate landscape where a thriving mining town should stand. Her carefully packed trunks contain everything she owns, including the portrait of a man she's never met but has agreed to marry. Instead of the prosperous silver boom town promised in a year of correspondence, she finds a valley ravaged by disaster, half buried in mud and debris. The man who was supposed to meet her is nowhere to be seen, and what remains of Silverdale barely qualifies as a settlement, but fate has more surprises in store. The town's protector, a former Texas Ranger with scars both visible and hidden, will soon challenge everything she believes about her future, her past, and her own strength. Before Rebecca can rebuild from the ruins of broken promises, she must uncover truths buried deeper than the mud that swallowed Silverdale's dreams. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stagecoach from Tucson to Silverdale had been brutal. 2 days of bone-jarring travel across unforgiving terrain that left Rebecca Matthews feeling as if she'd been tumbled in a washing barrel. Her grey travelling dress, once crisp and proper when she departed St. Louis 3 weeks prior, now hung limp with dust and sweat. The coach's other passengers, a whiskey drummer and an elderly missionary couple, had disembarked at the last stop, leaving her alone for the final leg of the journey. "Silverdale," the driver announced, his voice carrying no enthusiasm. "What's left of it, anyway?" Rebecca gathered her reticule and smoothed her skirts before peering through the window. What greeted her bore no resemblance to the thriving Silver town with modern amenities that Thomas Blackwood had described in his letters. Where there should have been a bustling main street with businesses and homes, there was a muddy wasteland. A few structures remained standing, but many were partially buried, their doors and windows choked with dried mud. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The driver, Joel he'd called himself, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "No mistake, ma'am. Silverdale got hit by a mudslide 3 months back when the spring rains came. Half the town's buried, quarter of the folks dead or missing." He began unloading her trunk. "You sure this is where you're headed? Ain't much left?" Rebecca stepped carefully onto the muddy ground, her boots immediately sinking an inch. "Yes, I'm certain. I'm to meet Mr. Thomas Blackwood. He owns the Silver Crown mine." Joel's weathered face clouded. "Blackwood? Ain't heard that name since before the slide." A cold feeling settled in Rebecca's stomach. 29 years old, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical chignon and intelligent hazel eyes, she had always prided herself on her sensible nature. Agreeing to become a mail-order bride had been a calculated decision. After her father's death left her with mounting debts and unwanted attention from her father's business partner, Harold Whitley. Thomas Blackwood's letters had painted a picture of stability and prosperity, a successful mine owner seeking a partner rather than a servant, a man who appreciated her education and bookkeeping skills. For 14 months they had corresponded, their letters growing increasingly personal, until she had accepted his proposal. "There must be someone who knows him," she insisted. "He was expecting me today. June 5th. Joel shrugged. "You might ask. At Wallace's store. It's still standing, that building with the blue door down yonder. Old man Wallace keeps tabs on whoever's left." As the stagecoach pulled away, leaving her standing beside her trunk and 2 valises, Rebecca fought rising. Panic. The small gathering of onlookers, perhaps a dozen people, regarded her with curiosity but made no move to help. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and began walking toward the blue door Joel had indicated. Silverdale had clearly once been a proper town. Through the mud and debris, she could make out what had been a church steeple, now leaning, precariously, A sign for Harper's assay office jutted from the mud at an odd angle. The air smelled of minerals and decay. Inside Wallace's store, dim light filtered through mud-caked windows. Shelves held sparse supplies, canned goods, ammunition, basic clothing, and mining equipment. A thin man with spectacles looked up from behind a scarred wooden counter. "Morning, ma'am. Samuel Wallace at your service." His curious gaze took in her travel-worn appearance. "You're a long way from wherever you came from. Rebecca Matthews. I've come from St. Louis to meet Thomas Blackwood of the Silver Crown Mine. We were to be married today." Wallace's expression shifted to something like pity. "Miss Matthews, I'm afraid there's no easy way to say this. Thomas Blackwood's mine was at the epicenter of the mudslide. The entire operation, shaft, offices, equipment, it's all buried. Under 30 feet of mud. No one's seen or heard from Blackwood since the disaster." Rebecca gripped the counter to steady herself. "That can't be right. I received a letter from him just 6 weeks ago, confirming today's date. Mail's been irregular." "Since the slide," Wallace replied. "The letter you got was likely sent before the disaster. I'm sorry to be the bearer of such news." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "Is there any chance he survived? Perhaps he's in another town seeking help?" The ranger searched for survivors for weeks. If Blackwood made it out, he'd have. "Sent word?" Wallace paused. "Miss Matthews, Silverdale isn't what it was. Most who could leave have left. Those of us remaining are barely holding on." "I understand." Rebecca's mind raced through options, none of them promising. Her return ticket to St. Louis had been purchased with nearly the last of her funds. The remainder, carefully budgeted for her new life, wouldn't last long, and returning east meant facing Harold Whitley, who had made it clear he intended to acquire both her father's debts and Rebecca herself. "Is there somewhere I might stay while I consider my options?" Wallace scratched his chin. "Widow Simmons. Takes boarders. Her place survived on the high ground. $2 a week, includes breakfast." He hesitated. "If you're short on funds, she sometimes arranges credit for those in difficult circumstances." "Thank you. I can manage the fee." Rebecca maintained her composure through sheer will. Inside her reticule, hidden in a false bottom, was her emergency. Fund. 10 double-eagle gold coins her father had insisted she always keep for desperate times. It seemed those times had arrived. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the grimy window, Rebecca saw a rider dismounting from a tall, black horse. Even from a distance, the man commanded attention, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped, moving with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to danger. A distinctive star-shaped badge glinted on his vest. "That's Mason Garrett," Wallace said, a note of respect in his voice. "Former Texas Ranger. Governor appointed him special law officer for this region after the slide. Keeps order, coordinates recovery efforts." He lowered his voice. "Some call him the Reckoner on account of how he dealt with looters who came after the disaster." The store's door swung open, and Mason Garrett filled the frame. Dust coated his clothing, a practical ensemble of dark trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest. A Colt revolver rested against his right hip. Rebecca estimated him to be in his mid-30s, though the lines around his eyes suggested he'd seen enough for several lifetimes. Most striking was the scar, a jagged line that ran from his left temple down his cheek, disappearing into a neatly trimmed beard that didn't quite hide the damage. His eyes, a startling shade of grey, took in the store's interior before settling on Rebecca. "Wallace," he nodded to the shopkeeper before turning. "To Rebecca. Ma'am, Ranger Garrett, this here's Miss Matthews. She's come all the way from St. Louis to marry Thomas Blackwood." Something flickered across Garrett's face, recognition perhaps, or concern. "Blackwood from the Silver Crown?" "Yes," Rebecca answered, finding her voice. "Though I've just learned about the mudslide. Mr. Wallace believes he may be among the victims." Garrett removed his hat, revealing dark hair threaded with silver at the temples. The gesture seemed automatic, a remnant of gentlemanly training at odds with his rugged appearance. "Miss Matthews, I personally searched the Silver Crown property after the slide. There were no survivors at that location." His voice was deep, with a hint of Texas in the vowels. "I'm sorry for your loss. It wasn't a loss precisely," Rebecca corrected him. We'd never met in person. Our relationship existed entirely through correspondence." Garrett's eyes narrowed slightly. "Correspondence that brought you all the way to Arizona territory?" The implied judgment stung. "Mr. Blackwood and I wrote to each other for 14 months before I agreed to his proposal. His letters revealed a thoughtful, educated man with prospects and principles." She lifted her chin. "Not that I owe explanations to a stranger." A boy of about 13 burst into the store, breathless. "Ranger Garrett, Pa sent me to fetch you. Riders coming from the east. Looks like Murphy's crew." Garrett's demeanor shifted instantly. "How many?" "6, maybe 7, armed. Get back to your father. Tell him I'm coming." As the boy raced out, Garrett turned to Wallace. "Get everyone inside. Lock up." His gaze returned to Rebecca. "Miss Matthews, I suggest you remain here until I've dealt with this situation." Without waiting for a response, he strode out, leaving Rebecca with more questions than answers. Through the window, she watched him mount his horse with practiced ease and gallop toward the eastern edge of what remained of the town. "Who is Murphy?" she asked Wallace, who was hurriedly shutting window shutters. "Luke Murphy," he spat the name like a curse, "runs a gang that's been trying to claim abandoned properties since the slide. Says he's filed mining claims, but his papers are as fake as his smile." Wallace checked the loading of a shotgun he'd pulled from beneath the counter. "Garrett's run them off twice already." Rebecca's mind was still processing the cascade of revelations. Blackwood missing and presumed dead, the town largely destroyed, and now the threat of violence. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Wallace seemed surprised by the offer. "Best help would be staying out of the line of fire, ma'am. Though if you got steady hands, you could help me load these." He pushed a box of shotgun shells across the counter. Rebecca removed her gloves and began methodically loading shells into the second shotgun Wallace produced. Her father, an avid hunter, had insisted she learn firearm basics. "Knowledge never weighs you down," he'd always said. "You've handled weapons before," Wallace observed. "My father believed in practical education." She finished loading and set the shotgun carefully on the counter. "What will happen if these men overpower Ranger Garrett?" Wallace's expression darkened. "Nothing good for any of us. Murphy wants Silverdale's remaining claims. With silver prices rising, even buried mines might be worth recovering. Anyone standing in his way tends to have unfortunate accidents." From outside came the sound of hoofbeats and men's voices. Rebecca moved to the window, peering through a gap in the shutters. 7 riders faced Garrett in the muddy street. The lead rider, Murphy, she presumed, was gesturing animatedly while Garrett sat motionless on his black horse, one hand resting near his holstered revolver. "Can't hear what they're saying," Wallace muttered beside her. The confrontation lasted several tense minutes. Finally, Murphy spat in the dirt, wheeled his horse around, and led his men back the way they'd come. Only when they disappeared from view did Garrett turn his horse toward the store. "Let him in," Wallace told Rebecca, still clutching his shotgun. She unlocked the door as Garrett dismounted. Up close, he seemed even more imposing, well over 6 feet tall with the coiled readiness of a predator at rest. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Murphy's backing down for now," he announced, stepping inside. "Claims he has new ownership papers for the Silver Crown property." His gaze fell on Rebecca. "Says he bought the claim from Blackwood's cousin in Tucson last month." "That's impossible," Rebecca said immediately. "Thomas has no cousin. He was raised in an orphanage in Pennsylvania. Garrett studied her with new interest. "You certain about that?" "Absolutely. He mentioned it specifically in his third letter, how he'd built his business without family connections or inheritance. She'd memorized his letters, reading them, repeatedly during the journey west." "Interesting." Garrett exchanged a look with Wallace. Murphy's legal claim just got more complicated. "What does this mean?" Rebecca asked. "It means," Garrett said, "that someone is using Blackwood's disappearance to fraudulently claim his property, and you, Miss Matthews, may be the only person who can prove it." He considered her for a moment. "Do you have these letters with you?" Rebecca nodded. "In my trunk. Every one of them. I'd like to see them." It wasn't quite a request. "They're private correspondence," she objected. "They're also potential evidence in what's now looking like a criminal matter." Garrett's tone softened slightly. "Miss Matthews, I understand today has brought one shock after another. But if Murphy succeeds in claiming Blackwood's property, any chance of discovering what truly happened to him, or to any assets he may have left, disappears." Rebecca hesitated, torn between protecting Thomas's private words and potentially helping a man who might still be alive. "I'll help you get settled at Widow Simmons' place," Garrett continued. "Once you're comfortable, we can discuss the letters, and what they might tell us about Blackwood, and whoever's pretending to be his family." The unexpected kindness in his gruff offer tipped the balance. "Very well, Ranger Garrett, but I'll decide which portions are relevant to your investigation." The faintest smile touched his scarred face. "Fair enough, Miss Matthews. And given the circumstances, you might as well call me Mason. I suspect we'll be seeing a lot of each other while we unravel this mystery." As they arranged to transport her trunk to the widow's boarding house, Rebecca found herself studying Mason. Garrett. The ranger was nothing like Thomas Blackwood had described himself. Cultured, refined, gentle. Yet there was something trustworthy in Garrett's direct manner, a sense of capability that provided unexpected comfort amid the ruins of her planned future. Silverdale had been destroyed. Thomas was missing, and danger lurked at the edges of what remained. But as the Arizona sun beat down on the mud-ravaged town, Rebecca Matthews made a silent promise to herself. She would discover what happened to the man whose letters had brought her west, with or without the intimidating ranger's help. What she couldn't possibly know was how deeply their fates were already intertwined, or that the mud-buried secrets of Silverdale would change both their lives forever. Widow Simmons' boarding house stood on elevated ground at the northwestern edge of Silverdale, one of the few structures completely spared by the mudslide. The two-story clapboard building, painted a faded yellow with white trim, boasted a wide porch and actual glass windows, luxuries in a frontier mining town, especially one devastated by disaster. Martha Simmons herself proved to be a sturdy woman, in her early 50s, with silver-streaked black hair and shrewd blue eyes that missed nothing. She greeted Rebecca with practical kindness, showing no surprise at Mason Garrett's presence as he carried Rebecca's trunk up the narrow staircase to the second floor. "Room at the end of the hall," Martha directed. "Best one I've got left. Has its own washstand and a view of the mountains instead of the mud." The room was small but scrupulously clean, with a narrow bed, a pine dresser, a small table with a single chair, and, as promised, a ceramic washstand with a pitcher and bowl. Compared to the stagecoach and the devastation outside, it seemed almost luxurious. "Supper's at 6 sharp," Martha informed her. "Breakfast at 7. You'll be responsible for your own midday meal, though I usually have bread and preserves available." "Thank you," Rebecca said, suddenly aware of how exhausted she felt. "This will be perfect." When Martha departed, Mason remained in the doorway, seemingly reluctant to leave. "Murphy and his men will likely return to town tomorrow," he said. "Best if you don't wander alone until we've resolved the situation. Do you believe I'm in danger, Ranger Garrett?" "Mason," he corrected automatically. And yes, potentially, if you can prove the cousin is fabricated, you're a threat to Murphy's. Claim on the Silver Crown. Beyond that, he hesitated. Mail-order situations can be complicated. Blackwood might have had other correspondence you're unaware of. The implication stung. You think I wasn't the only one? I think a mining operation worth thousands requires careful investigation, especially when its owner vanishes in suspicious circumstances. His grey eyes held hers steadily. The mudslide was natural, but its timing was convenient for several interested parties. Rebecca considered this. You believe Thomas may have been murdered? I'm keeping all possibilities open. He gestured to her trunk. Those letters might contain information Blackwood didn't realize was significant. Details about rivals, threats, business dealings. Rebecca moved to her trunk and unlocked it. Beneath layers of carefully packed clothing lay a cedar box containing Thomas's letters, 28 in total, each in its original envelope. She removed the box but didn't open it. I'll review these tonight and make notes on anything that might be relevant, she said. Perhaps we could meet tomorrow to discuss my findings? Mason nodded, accepting her need for privacy. I'll come by after my morning patrol, around 10 if that suits you. After he left, Rebecca sat on the bed, the box of letters in her lap. The events of the day felt surreal. The shock of finding Silverdale in ruins, learning of Thomas's disappearance, and now this strange alliance with the intimidating ranger. She'd come west, prepared to be a wife. Instead, she found herself potentially involved in a murder investigation. The dinner bell rang before she could begin reading the letters. Descending to the dining room, Rebecca found herself joining 4 other boarders, a middle-aged teacher named Miss Hollister, an elderly prospector called Doc, though he had no medical training, a young telegraph operator named Timothy Wells, and a quiet woman introduced only as Mrs. Henderson, whose husband had died in the mudslide. Conversation over Martha's hearty beef stew centered on Murphy's appearance in town. "Third time this month," Doc grumbled, his weathered face creased with worry. "Garrett can't hold them off forever." "The territorial governor promised additional lawmen," Miss Hollister said. "They should have arrived weeks ago." "Governor's promises don't mean much out here," Mrs. Henderson said softly, her first contribution to the conversation. "Silverdale's dying. Why protect a grave?" "Because some things are worth saving," Rebecca found herself saying, "even if they don't look like much at first glance." The other boarders regarded her with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "You're the woman who came for Blackwood," Doc said, recognition dawning. "Heard some talk at Wallace's store." Rebecca nodded. "Yes, though it appears I've arrived too late." "Don't be so sure," Timothy interjected. 3 weeks ago I received a telegraph addressed to Blackwood. Couldn't deliver it, of course, but it's still at the office." Rebecca's pulse quickened. "A telegraph? From whom?" Sender identified himself as J. Blackwood from Pennsylvania. Timothy shrugged. "I assumed it was a relative." "Thomas had no living relatives," Rebecca said automatically, then caught herself. "At least none that he ever mentioned in his letters to me." The young operator raised his eyebrows. "Well, somebody claiming to be J. Blackwood paid good money to send that wire. Want me to bring it by tomorrow?" "Please," Rebecca said. "I'd be most grateful." After dinner, Rebecca returned to her room and opened the cedar box. Thomas's letters were arranged chronologically, from his first tentative inquiry, answering her advertisement in the matrimonial news, to his final letter confirming. The June 5th meeting. Reading them again, she was struck by their consistent tone, thoughtful, articulate, with a quiet ambition that had appealed to her practical nature. Thomas had described himself as 36 years old, educated in Philadelphia before heading west to seek his fortune. The Silver Crown mine, according to his letters, had produced steadily for 3 years. with recent assays showing increased silver content that promised substantial returns. He'd written of his home, modest but comfortable, with room for expansion as our circumstances improve, and his hopes for the future. Rebecca made notes of any details that might be relevant to Mason's investigation. Mentions of business competitors, particularly a man named Hargrove who owned the neighboring claim. References to town politics, including conflicts with Silverdale's mayor over water rights, and Thomas's plans to expand the mine with new equipment scheduled to arrive in April, just before the mudslide. One detail caught her attention that she hadn't considered significant before. In his 9th letter, Thomas mentioned hiring a new foreman. Monsieur Garrett comes with excellent recommendations, having worked the Nevada silver fields for several years. His experience with deep shaft mining should prove invaluable as we expand. Operations. Monsieur Garrett. Could it be Mason? The coincidence seemed too great, yet the ranger hadn't mentioned any connection to Thomas or the Silver Crown mine. Rebecca sat back, troubled by the omission. If Mason had worked for Thomas, why hide that fact? And if he knew Thomas personally, would that change his perspective on the investigation? Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams filled with mud and faceless men searching through ruins. She woke before dawn, the unfamiliar sounds of the boarding house, creaking timbers, distant voices, the call of desert birds pulling her from restless slumber. After dressing in her second-best day dress, a practical navy blue with minimal bustle, Rebecca made her way downstairs. Martha was already busy in the kitchen, the smell of biscuits and coffee filling the air. "Early riser," the widow observed. "Good. Lazy people don't survive long in these parts," Rebecca smiled. "My father always said the day's best hours are those before others are awake." "Smart man." Martha poured her a cup of coffee. "You'll find a washroom off the back porch if you're wanting to freshen up. Had it added last year. Indoor plumbing, if you can believe it. Thomas Blackwood helped with the cost, said it would raise property values." She paused. "He was a forward-thinking man, Miss Matthews. I'm sorry you didn't get the chance to meet him." The casual mention of indoor plumbing, a luxury even in St. Louis, highlighted the contrast between Silverdale's promised prosperity and its current state. "Did you know him well?" "Well enough. He took his evening meals here twice weekly." Martha continued, kneading dough as she spoke. "Quiet man, educated like yourself. Read books by lamplight, kept to himself mostly. Seemed lonely, if you want the truth. Did he ever mention our correspondence?" Martha smiled. "Last few months he didn't talk about much else. Started fixing up his house. New curtains, actual. Carpets ordered from back east. Bookshelves built special for what he called a ladies' collection. Never saw a man so pleased about receiving mail." The confirmation that Thomas's interest had been genuine brought both comfort and deeper sadness. He hadn't been merely some confidence man seeking a convenient housekeeper or a woman's savings. "His house, is it still standing?" Rebecca asked. Martha's expression grew somber. "Partially. East side took damage from the slide, but the main structure survived. It's up on Pine Ridge, about a mile from town." She hesitated. "Most of his things were looted after the slide, I'm afraid. I'd like to see it nevertheless. Best ask Ranger Garrett to accompany you. Pine Ridge isn't safe to travel alone these days." After breakfast, Rebecca explored the small town, or what remained of it. In daylight, the devastation was even more apparent. The mudslide had come from the southeast, sweeping down from the mountains where spring rains had loosened soil on deforested slopes. According to Martha, the mining operations had removed too many trees, leaving nothing to hold the earth when the heavy rains came. The slide had buried the southeastern section completely, including the mine entrances, company, offices and miners' quarters. The northwestern portion, where the boarding house stood, had escaped with minimal damage due to its elevation. The business district along Main Street had been partially buried, with some structures still standing, but damaged. Wallace's store served as the town's lifeline now, receiving weekly supply wagons from Tucson. The telegraph office operated sporadically when young Timothy could keep the lines repaired. The saloon, the Lucky Strike, had reopened in a damaged building, serving more as a gathering place than a proper business. Rebecca found herself drawn to what remained of the church. Its steeple had collapsed, but the main structure stood, missing most of its eastern wall where the mud had torn it away. Inside, a few pews remained, along with a simple altar. Someone had made efforts to keep it clean, sweeping away dust and debris. "This is where we held the memorial service," a voice said behind her. Rebecca turned to find Mason Garrett standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the bright morning light. He wore the same practical attire as the day before, though his shirt was clean and his dark hair damp, as if recently washed. "For those lost in the mudslide?" she asked. He nodded, stepping inside. 27 confirmed dead, another 15 missing, presumed buried. His voice was solemn. "We recovered what bodies we could, but—" He gestured toward the mountains. "Nature doesn't always give back what it takes." Rebecca studied him in the diffused light filtering through damaged windows. Without the tension of their first meeting, she could see the weariness in his face. The burden of responsibility he carried. "You never mentioned you worked for Thomas Blackwood," she said quietly. Mason's expression registered surprise, then wariness. "How did you know that?" "He mentioned hiring a foreman named M. Garrett in one of his letters." "I assume that was you?" He sighed, removing his hat. "Yes, though my employment was brief. I joined the Silver Crown as foreman in February. By early March, Blackwood and I had disagreements about operations. I left before the slide." "What kind of disagreements?" Mason studied her for a moment, as if assessing how much to share. Blackwood was pushing the miners too hard, expanding too quickly. "I raised safety concerns about the new shaft he wanted to open. He didn't appreciate my input." "That doesn't sound like the man who wrote to me," Rebecca said, troubled by the contradiction. "His letters emphasized safety and responsible management." "Men often present their best selves in courtship," Mason pointed out. "When money and pride are involved, different qualities emerge." The observation stung, though Rebecca couldn't dismiss its potential truth. "Did you maintain contact with him after leaving his employment?" "No. I took a temporary position with the Territorial Marshal's office in Tucson. After the slide, the governor appointed me to restore order here." He gestured around the damaged church. "Murphy and his kind started appearing within days, trying to claim abandoned properties." Rebecca considered this new information. "Timothy Wells mentioned a telegraph for Thomas from someone named J. Blackwood in Pennsylvania. He's bringing it by the boarding house this morning." Mason's interest sharpened visibly. "J. Blackwood? Thomas claimed he had no family." "Exactly my thought. I'd like you to be there when Timothy delivers it." He nodded. "I was heading to the boarding house to meet you anyway. I've been to the county recorder's office in Tucson. Murphy filed claim papers 3 weeks ago, signed by a James Blackwood, identifying himself as Thomas's cousin and sole heir." He pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. "This is a copy of the filing." Rebecca examined the document. The signature at the bottom, James Blackwood, was written in an educated hand. The penmanship similar enough to Thomas's letters that a casual observer might not note the differences. But Rebecca, who had studied those letters for months, could see subtle variations in the formation of the letters. "This isn't Thomas's handwriting, though it's clearly designed to resemble it," she said. "Whoever this James is, he's studied Thomas's signature." Mason raised an eyebrow, impressed. "You're observant." "I was a teacher before my father's illness. Required me to manage his household," she explained. "Detecting copied handwriting becomes second nature when grading students' work." For the first time, a genuine smile transformed Mason's scarred face, softening the hard lines and bringing warmth to his grey eyes. "A useful skill in our current situation. They walked together to the boarding house, Mason filling her in on what he'd learned about Murphy. The man had appeared in Silverdale 2 weeks after the mudslide, initially offering to buy damaged properties from survivors at fractions of their value. When few accepted, he began producing increasingly dubious ownership documents for properties whose owners had died or disappeared. "He's working with someone inside the county government," Mason explained. "The paperwork is too perfect, too quickly processed to be legitimate. And the territorial governor hasn't intervened? The governor has mining interests of his own. As long as someone's extracting silver and paying taxes, he's not overly concerned with who holds the claims." The bitterness in Mason's voice was evident. The people who died here deserve better. They reached the boarding house to find Timothy Wells waiting on the porch, a yellow telegraph form in hand. The young operator looked nervous. "Miss Matthews, Ranger Garrett," he greeted them. "I took another look at this telegraph this morning. Thought you should know it was sent from Philadelphia on May 12th, 3 weeks after the mudslide." Rebecca and Mason exchanged glances. "May I see it?" she asked. Timothy handed over the paper. The message was brief. "To Thomas Blackwood, Silverdale, Arizona Territory, from James Blackwood, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, arriving June 10th, stop papers. Prepared as discussed. Stop, confirm payment arrangements upon arrival." Stop, Rebecca read it twice before passing it to Mason. "Thomas told me explicitly he had no family, that he was raised in St. Matthew's Orphanage in Philadelphia after his parents died in a fire. Which means either he lied to you," Mason said, studying the telegraph, "or this James Blackwood is an imposter, who conveniently appears just as Murphy tries to claim the Silver Crown property," Rebecca added. Mason looked up at Timothy. "When did Murphy first come to town?" The young operator thought for a moment. "April 28th, I think, about 10 days after the slide." "And this telegraph arrived when?" "May 15th. Mason handed the telegraph back to Rebecca. "So Murphy arrives, starts trying to buy claims, meets resistance, and suddenly a long-lost cousin appears to inherit the most valuable property in town." His jaw tightened. "Murphy's not working alone. This is too coordinated. If James Blackwood is arriving June 10th, that's tomorrow," Rebecca pointed out, "we'll be able to confront him directly." "Assuming he exists at all," Mason said grimly. "The telegraph could be misdirection, something Murphy arranged to legitimize his claim if questioned." Rebecca felt a chill despite the morning heat. The conspiracy Mason described was sophisticated and calculated, far beyond simple opportunism following a natural disaster. "I'd like to see Thomas's house," she said suddenly. "If he was preparing for my arrival, there might be documents or personal items that could help us understand what happened." Mason hesitated. "Pine Ridge isn't secure. Murphy's men have been seen in that area. All the more reason to go now, before James Blackwood supposedly arrives." She met his gaze directly. "I came 2,000 miles to meet Thomas Blackwood. At the very least, I want to see where he lived." Mason studied her determined expression, then nodded. "We'll go after midday, when Murphy's men are usually at the saloon." He turned to Timothy. "Wells, not a word about this telegraph or Miss Matthews's interest in Blackwood's property. To anyone." Timothy nodded earnestly. "Yes, sir. I mean, no, sir, I won't say anything." As the young man hurried back to the telegraph office, Mason turned to Rebecca. "You should prepare for rough terrain, and bring whatever you found in those letters that might be relevant." Rebecca nodded, suddenly aware of how quickly her situation in Silverdale had evolved. She had arrived expecting to become a bride. Now she was investigating what might be her intended husband's murder, the mystery of Thomas Blackwood, who he really was, what had happened to him, and why someone would go to such lengths to claim his property, had become personal in a way she hadn't anticipated. and the taciturn ranger with the scarred face had become improbably her closest ally in a town full of secrets buried deeper than the mud that had claimed so many lives. The path to Pine Ridge wound through scrub-covered foothills east of town. Rebecca had changed into her simplest skirt and sturdiest boots, with a shawl to protect against the afternoon sun. Mason rode beside her on his black gelding, while she managed a gentle mare borrowed from Martha Simmons's small stable. Thomas wrote that his home offered views of the entire valley, Rebecca said, as they crested a rise. He said on clear evenings you could see the lights of Silverdale like stars fallen to earth. Mason's expression remained neutral. The view is impressive, he acknowledged, though different now than what he would have described. From their vantage point, the devastation was starkly visible, a great swath of mud cutting through the southeastern portion of the valley, burying everything in its path. The Silver Crown Mine's location was marked only by a half-collapsed head frame jutting from the mud, like the bones of some prehistoric creature. How many miners were working? When the slide hit, Rebecca asked quietly. 16 men on the day shift. Mason's voice was flat, controlled. We recovered 9 bodies. The rest are still down there. The personal cost of the disaster hung between them as they continued upward along a winding trail. Mason remained vigilant, his hand never far from his holstered Colt, eyes constantly scanning the surrounding terrain. After 20 minutes of steady climbing, they rounded a bend, and Thomas Blackwood's house came into view. It stood on a small plateau, partially sheltered by a granite outcropping that had protected it from the full force of the mudslide. The eastern portion had collapsed where mud had struck it, but the main structure, a surprisingly substantial 2-story home built of local stone and timber, remained intact. It's larger than I expected, Rebecca said, surprised by the size and quality of the construction. Thomas had described his home as modest but comfortable, which hardly captured the reality before her. Blackwood built it to impress, Mason commented. Used profits from the first year's silver strike, brought in craftsmen from Tucson. They dismounted and tied their horses to a hitching post that had somehow survived the destruction. As they approached the house, Rebecca noted signs of recent activity, footprints in the dried mud, a broken window that showed fresh damage. Someone's been here, Mason observed, drawing his revolver. Recently. He moved ahead of her, approaching the partially open front door with the practiced caution of a man accustomed to danger. Rebecca followed several paces behind, her heart pounding. Mason pushed the door fully open with his boot, revealing an entrance hall with a curved staircase leading to the 2nd floor. Wait here, he instructed, disappearing inside. Rebecca remained on the porch, taking in details that spoke of Thomas's character: carved woodwork around the doorframe, stained glass inserts in the upper portion of the door, a meticulously laid stone path now partially buried in mud. Despite his claims of modest circumstances, Thomas Blackwood had built a home that reflected considerable wealth and attention to detail. Mason emerged several minutes later, holstering his weapon. House is clear. Looks like looters have been through, but they left plenty behind. Too much to carry, I'd guess. Inside, the evidence of Thomas's preparations for Rebecca's arrival was immediately apparent. The parlor contained newly delivered furniture, still partially wrapped in shipping materials. A dining room featured a table set for 2, with fine china and crystal now coated in dust. Most poignant was a small study off the main hall, its walls lined with empty bookshelves. He mentioned building shelves for my books, Rebecca said softly, running her fingers along the polished wood. He asked what authors I favored so he could stock it accordingly. Mason watched her from the doorway. He wanted to impress you, or simply make me feel welcome. She turned to survey the room. It feels wrong somehow, seeing these preparations when he isn't here to explain them. Plenty here that needs explaining, Mason agreed, gesturing toward the other wing of the house. His office might hold answers. Thomas's office was a large room dominated by a massive oak desk. Unlike the rest of the house, which showed signs of recent preparation, this space had a lived-in quality. Papers stacked in orderly piles, geological samples labeled and organized on shelves, maps of the Silver Crown property pinned to the walls. "This looks untouched by looters," Rebecca observed. "Most wouldn't recognize the value of mining documents," Mason said, examining the desk. "They were after silver plate and portable valuables." Rebecca moved to a large safe in the corner. The combination would likely be something personal to him. Any suggestions from his letters? She thought for a moment. He mentioned his birthday several times, October 17th, 1847. Mason tried the combination 10-17-47, but the safe remained locked. "Perhaps the date he acquired the Silver Crown," Rebecca suggested. He was quite proud of that accomplishment. June 21st, 1880. This combination, 62180, yielded a satisfying click. Mason turned the handle, and the heavy door swung open to reveal stacks of documents, several canvas bags, presumably containing silver ore samples, and a smaller lockbox. Rebecca felt a moment's hesitation. Opening the safe seemed an invasion of Thomas's privacy. Yet if he had indeed met with foul play, these documents might reveal why. Mason removed the papers first. Deeds, assay reports, payroll records, and correspondence with suppliers. He laid them on the desk, creating organized piles as they worked through the materials. Rebecca found her teaching experience useful. She'd developed a system for evaluating student work that transferred well to analyzing documents. Among the papers, several items caught her attention. A series of threatening letters from someone named Edward Hargrove, whose mine bordered the Silver Crown. Correspondence with the Territorial Bank of Arizona regarding a substantial loan, and most intriguingly, a half-completed letter addressed to Rebecca herself, dated April 15th, 3 days before the mudslide. "My dearest Rebecca, as your arrival draws near, I find myself both eager and apprehensive. There is much I should have explained in previous correspondence, circumstances that may affect your decision to join your life with mine. The Silver Crown's fortunes have taken an unexpected turn, both promising and concerning. The new assays show richer ore than anticipated, but this discovery has attracted unwanted attention. EH has renewed his efforts to force a merger, using methods that border on criminal. Meanwhile, our expansion faces opposition from unexpected quarters. MG raised valid safety concerns, yet I cannot afford delays with the banknote coming due. I fear I have created enemies where I needed allies. I write this not to alarm you, but to prepare you for potential challenges. By the time you arrive, I hope to have resolved these matters. If not, please know that any difficulties we face stem not from reckless management, but from..." The letter ended there, unfinished. April 15th, 3 days before the mudslide that had presumably claimed Thomas's life. The timing could hardly be coincidental. "Mason," Rebecca said, her voice tight, "you should see this." He read the letter, his expression darkening. "EH would be Edward Hargrove, and MG..." "You," Rebecca confirmed. "He acknowledges your safety concerns were valid." Mason set the letter down carefully. "This suggests Blackwood was facing serious pressure, financial and otherwise, just before the slide. Could Hargrove have been responsible for what happened to Thomas?" Rebecca asked. "Possible. Hargrove's been trying to consolidate the smaller claims in this region for years." Mason continued examining documents. "But causing a mudslide would be extreme, even for him, and it damaged his own properties as well." Rebecca opened the small lockbox, which wasn't secured. Inside, she found something unexpected, a stack of letters tied with ribbon, her letters to Thomas, carefully preserved. Beneath them lay a small velvet box containing a diamond ring, modest but elegant, clearly meant as her engagement ring. The physical evidence of Thomas's intentions brought a lump to her throat. Whatever his business concerns or possible deceptions, his feelings for her had apparently been genuine. As she replaced the ring, her fingers encountered a hidden compartment in the lockbox. Pressing the concealed mechanism revealed a false bottom, containing a single document, a certificate from St. Matthew's Orphanage in Philadelphia, confirming that Thomas Blackwood had been received into their care on October 19, 1852, following his parents' deaths. "Mason, look at this," she said, handing him the certificate. "This confirms what Thomas told me about being an orphan." Mason studied the document. "Which means James Blackwood is definitely an imposter." He looked up, expression grim. "Someone is going to considerable lengths to claim Blackwood's property, creating a fictional relative, forging documents. The question is why? The silver crown was valuable, but hardly the only mine in the territory." Rebecca returned to the desk, examining the maps pinned to the wall. One showed the Silver Crown property boundaries, with detailed notations about shaft locations and geological features. Thomas had marked several areas with red ink, including a section labeled New Discovery, April 10th. "This might explain it," she said, pointing to the notation. "Thomas found something significant just before the mudslide. Something worth killing." 4. Mason joined her at the map. "The location is in the deepest part of the main shaft, completely buried now." He traced the boundaries with his finger. "There's something else odd here. This boundary line with Hargrove's property doesn't match the county records I reviewed." "How so?" "According to this map, the Silver Crown extends 300 yards, further east than officially recorded. That would include Hargrove's most productive shaft." Rebecca considered the implications. A boundary dispute could explain the threatening letters. If Thomas had evidence the property line was incorrectly drawn, it would be more than a dispute, Mason said grimly. It would mean Hargrove has been stealing silver from Blackwood's claim for years. The potential damages would be enormous. Noise from outside interrupted their discussion, the sound of approaching horses. Mason moved quickly to the window, keeping to one side as he peered out. "Murphy," he said tersely, "and 5 of his men. They're heading up the path." Rebecca gathered the most crucial documents, the unfinished letter, the orphanage certificate, and the boundary map, and tucked them into her skirt pocket. "Is there another way out?" Mason nodded. "Back stairs lead down to the kitchen. We can exit through the east side where the structure is damaged." He drew his revolver. "Stay close and move quickly." They hurried through the house to the partially collapsed eastern wing. The kitchen showed signs of hasty abandonment, dishes still in the drying rack, a kettle on the cold stove. A doorway led to what had once been a covered porch, but was now a jumble of splintered timber and dried mud. Mason guided Rebecca through the debris, keeping low to avoid being spotted through the gaps in the collapsed structure. They had almost reached the cover of a small outbuilding when a shout went up from the front of the house. "Check the back! They can't have gone far!" 2 of Murphy's men rounded the corner, rifles raised. Mason pushed Rebecca behind the remains of a stone wall and fired twice in quick succession. One man fell, the other ducked for cover. "Run for the horses," Mason ordered. "I'll hold them off." Rebecca hesitated only briefly before dashing toward the hitching post where their mounts waited. Behind her she heard more gunfire, Mason exchanging shots with Murphy's men. She reached the horses and quickly untied them, her hands shaking but movements precise. Mason appeared moments later, reloading his Colt as he ran. Blood stained his left sleeve, but he moved with determination. "You're hurt," Rebecca said as he mounted his gelding. "Graze," he replied tersely. "We need to move, now." They rode hard down the hillside, taking a different path than the one they'd ascended. Mason led them through dense brush, where pursuing riders would struggle to follow. Only when they reached the valley floor did they slow, cutting east instead. "Of returning directly to town." "Where are we going?" Rebecca asked. Can't risk leading Murphy back to the boarding house, Mason explained, wincing slightly as he adjusted his position in the saddle. I know a place we can shelter until dark. The place proved to be an abandoned line shack, a small, single-room structure once used by cowboys watching over grazing cattle. It stood in a small grove of cottonwood trees beside a seasonal creek, now reduced to a trickle in the summer heat. Inside, the shack contained only basic furnishings, a rough-hewn table, 2 stools, a narrow cot, and a small stone fireplace. Mason secured the horses in a lean-to at the back before examining the wound on his arm. Let me help, Rebecca offered, removing her shawl. I have some experience with injuries. Mason hesitated before nodding consent. Rebecca tore a strip from her petticoat and used it to bind the wound, a deep graze that had torn through his shirt sleeve and left a furrow in the muscle beneath. Clean shot, she commented, working efficiently. No fragments to remove, at least. Not my first, Mason said dryly, watching her practice movements. You've done this before. My father's factory employed 40 men working with dangerous machinery, she explained. I learned basic medical care out of necessity. She secured the bandage with a neat knot. That should hold until we can clean it properly. Mason tested the bandage, nodding approval. Thank you. He moved to the doorway, scanning their surroundings. We should be safe here until nightfall. Murphy won't risk searching this far from town with his limited men. As evening approached, Rebecca examined the documents they'd recovered from Thomas's office. The boundary map proved particularly interesting. Thomas had made detailed notes about geological formations that suggested the silver vein extending into Hargrove's claim originated on Silver Crown property. According to these notes, Thomas had commissioned a new survey, she told Mason. He was gathering evidence to challenge the boundary legally. Mason built a small fire in the fireplace, just enough to ward off the evening chill without creating noticeable smoke. That would explain Hargrove's threats. A successful challenge would cost him thousands, possibly his entire operation. But would it justify murder? Men have killed for far less, especially in mining country. Mason poured coffee into tin cups from supplies stored in the shack. The question is whether Hargrove actually arranged the mudslide or simply took advantage of it afterward. Rebecca accepted the coffee gratefully. And how Murphy fits into all this? Is he working for Hargrove or pursuing his own interests? I intend to find out. Mason's expression was determined. Starting with this James Blackwood, who's supposedly arriving tomorrow. As darkness fell, they prepared to return to town. The documents were secured inside Rebecca's bodice, the safest place to transport them without risking loss. Mason checked his weapon, then helped Rebecca mount her horse. We'll approach from the north, he explained. Less chance of being spotted that way. They rode in silence, the desert night alive with sounds, coyotes calling in the distance, the whisper of wind through creosote bushes, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats on packed earth. The stars above were brilliant in the clear air, countless points of light unmarred by city haze or coal smoke. Rebecca found herself studying Mason's profile in the starlight. The scar that traced his cheek seemed less harsh in this light, more a mark of experience than disfigurement. There was something compelling about his quiet competence, his unwavering focus on doing what needed to be done. Why did you stay? She asked suddenly. After the mudslide, most people left. You could have returned to the marshal's office in Tucson. Mason considered the question before answering. 27 graves on the hillside, 15 more who never got proper burial. Someone needed to ensure they received justice. He glanced at her. What about you? You could have taken the next stagecoach east when you learned about Blackwood. I could have, she acknowledged, but that would mean accepting defeat, allowing circumstances to dictate my path rather than choosing it myself. She straightened, in the saddle, Besides, Thomas deserves to have someone seek the truth about what happened to him. Even if we never met in person, I owe him that much." Mason nodded, respect evident in his expression. Truth is rare in these parts. Most people settle for whatever story benefits them. They reached the outskirts of Silverdale just after midnight. The town was mostly dark, with only the saloon showing signs of life, yellow lamplight spilling from its windows, the faint sound of a piano drifting through the night air. Mason escorted Rebecca to the boarding house, remaining alert for any sign of Murphy's men. The house was quiet, its occupants long since retired for the night. On the porch, Rebecca turned to face him. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked. "I'll meet the morning stage," Mason replied. "If James Blackwood exists, I'll be there to greet him. If not, we'll know Murphy's planning something else. I should be there too," Rebecca insisted. "I know more about Thomas's background than anyone else here." Mason started to object, then nodded. "First light, then. I'll come for you." He hesitated before adding, "Keep the documents secure. They're evidence of motive now, which makes them dangerous to possess." As he turned to leave, Rebecca impulsively touched his arm. "Thank you for believing in me, for helping me seek the truth." His grey eyes met hers, something unreadable passing through them. "Seems we're seeking the same thing, Miss Matthews. Truth doesn't come easily in places like Silverdale, but it matters all the same." With that, he disappeared into the darkness, leaving Rebecca to slip quietly into the boarding house, her mind filled with questions about silver mines, fraudulent claims, and a taciturn ranger whose commitment to justice might be the only thing standing between her and those who would bury the truth as thoroughly as the mudslide had buried the Silver Crown mine. Dawn broke over Silverdale with the promise of another scorching day. Rebecca had slept fitfully, her dreams troubled by images of mud-buried miners and Thomas's unfinished letter. She dressed with care, selecting a practical green skirt and white shirtwaist that would allow freedom of movement while maintaining propriety. The documents from Thomas's office remained hidden in a small pouch sewn into the lining of her corset, an old trick her grandmother had taught her for keeping valuables safe while traveling. "Men search trunks and pockets," Grandma Matthews had said, "but they rarely think to look where a lady keeps her secrets." Martha was already in the kitchen when Rebecca descended, kneading dough for the day's bread. The widow's sharp eyes took in Rebecca's attire and early hour. "Expecting trouble today?" she asked without preamble. Rebecca saw no reason to dissemble. "Mason and I are meeting in the morning. A man claiming to be Thomas's cousin is supposed to arrive." Martha's hands stilled momentarily. "Thomas had no family. He told me so himself when he first came to Silverdale." "Exactly. Which means whoever this James Blackwood may be, he's an imposter." The widow resumed kneading with renewed vigor. "Murphy's behind this, no doubt. That man's been circling what's left of Silverdale like a vulture." She glanced up. "You found something at Thomas's house yesterday, didn't you? Something that stirred up Murphy and his boys." News traveled quickly in small towns. "We found evidence that Thomas was involved in a boundary dispute with Edward Hargrove," Rebecca confirmed, "and that someone may have had reason to want him silenced." Martha nodded grimly. "Hargrove's had his eye on the Silver Crown since Thomas first struck silver. Nasty piece of work, drinks too much, treats his miners worse than mules." She pulled a shotgun from beneath the counter. "You'll be needing this, I expect." Rebecca stared at the weapon. "I appreciate the offer, but not an offer, child. A necessity." Martha pressed the shotgun into Rebecca's hands. "Cut down for easier handling. My late husband called it a coach gun. Simple to use, point and pull both triggers if trouble starts." The weight of the shortened shotgun was substantial but manageable. Rebecca had fired her father's hunting rifles, but never a shotgun. Still, she understood the principle. "Thank you." she said, accepting the weapon and the small leather pouch of shells Martha provided. "I pray it won't be necessary." "Prayers are well and good," Martha replied practically. "Buckshot's more reliable when dealing with Murphy's kind." A soft knock at the back door announced Mason's arrival. He entered the kitchen with the quiet alertness Rebecca was coming to recognize, eyes quickly scanning the room, noting exits and potential threats, a habit formed through years of danger. "Morning," he greeted them both. His left arm showed, a fresh bandage beneath his rolled shirt sleeve, and he'd clearly shaved and changed clothes since their parting the night before. Martha poured him coffee without asking. "Hear you're expecting trouble at the stage." Mason accepted the cup with a nod of thanks. "Possibility. Better to be prepared." His gaze fell on the shotgun Rebecca now held. Something like approval flickered in his grey eyes. "You know how to use that?" "Generally," she replied. "Point and pull both triggers if necessary." A faint smile touched his lips. Simple but effective. He turned to Martha. "We may need to leave town quickly depending on how this plays out." "Could your horses be ready?" The widow nodded. "Already saddled out back, food packed in the saddlebags." At their surprised expressions, she shrugged. "Been living on the frontier for 30 years. You learned to prepare for quick departures." As they left through the back door, Martha called after them. "Silver Crown Property has a line cabin up in Harris Canyon, stocked with supplies. Thomas used it during winter surveys." Mason paused. "How do you know about that?" A sad smile crossed the widow's face. "Thomas and I were friends, real friends, not just boarding house keeper and customer. He looked after me when Frank died. I kept an eye on his place when he traveled." Her expression hardened. "Find out what happened to him. He deserved better than to be buried in mud with no answers." The stagecoach was scheduled to arrive at 8 o'clock, though desert travel often meant delays. Rebecca and Mason positioned themselves across the street from Wallace's store, where the coach would stop. The shotgun remained partially concealed in the folds of Rebecca's skirt, while Mason stood casually, his coat unbuttoned for easy access to his holstered Colt. "If James Blackwood is genuinely an imposter," Rebecca asked quietly, "what's our plan?" "Observe first," Mason replied. "See who meets him, how prepared he is. If Murphy's involved directly, that changes things." The town was beginning to stir around them. Wallace opened his store, nodding discreetly in their direction. Timothy Wells unlocked the telegraph office. A few miners, those who still found, work in the remaining operational claims, headed toward the hills, picks and shovels over their shoulders. "Deputy Collins should be here," Mason said, scanning the street with growing concern. "He was supposed to patrol this morning." Deputy Levi Collins was Mason's only official support in Silverdale, a young former cavalry trooper who had taken the position when no one else would. While inexperienced, he was reliable and honest, rare qualities in what remained of the town. Could Murphy have delayed him somehow? Rebecca suggested. Before Mason could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. 6 riders appeared from the direction of Pine Ridge, Murphy and his men, with no attempt at concealment or subtlety. They took positions near the stagecoach stop, clearly waiting for the same arrival. Murphy himself was a surprisingly refined-looking man for a frontier criminal. In his early 40s, with carefully trimmed dark hair and a waxed mustache, he wore Eastern clothing of good quality. Only his eyes, cold and calculating, betrayed his true nature. "This complicates matters," Mason murmured. "Too many of them for direct confrontation." The stagecoach appeared right on schedule, 6 horses pulling the dust-covered vehicle at a brisk trot down Silverdale's main street. As it rolled to a stop before Wallace's store, Murphy's men straightened in their saddles, hands moving closer to their weapons. Only a single passenger disembarked, a slender man in his mid-30s wearing a well-tailored grey suit that showed only minimal travel wear. His blonde hair was fashionably cut, his clean-shaven face handsome in a conventional way. He carried a small valise and moved with the confident grace of someone accustomed to society. "James Blackwood, I presume," Murphy said, stepping forward with an outstretched hand. "Welcome to Silverdale. I'm Luke Murphy, your cousin's business associate." The newcomer accepted the handshake. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Murphy. Your telegrams have been most informative during this difficult time." His voice carried the refined accent of Eastern education. Philadelphia, or perhaps Boston. Rebecca felt a chill run through her. This James Blackwood was no rough impostor, but a polished performer who moved and spoke with practiced ease. Clearly, Murphy had recruited someone capable of maintaining the deception convincingly. Mason touched her arm lightly. "Stay here," he murmured, before stepping into the street. "Morning, Murphy," he called, approaching the group with casual confidence. "Didn't expect to see you in town so early." Murphy's expression hardened at Mason's appearance. "Ranger Garrett, just greeting Mr. Blackwood here, come to claim his cousin's property, as is his right." Mason nodded to the newcomer. "Mason Garrett, Territorial Ranger. Sorry about your cousin's passing." James Blackwood studied Mason with intelligent eyes. "Thank you, Ranger. Thomas and I weren't close in recent years, but family is family. I understand you were investigating the circumstances of the mudslide." "Still am," Mason replied. "Curious timing, that disaster. Just days after your cousin discovered something significant in the Silver Crown's main shaft." Something flickered briefly in Blackwood's expression, surprise quickly masked by practiced composure. "I wasn't aware of any new discovery. Thomas's last letter to me mentioned only routine operations." "When exactly did you last hear from your cousin, Mr. Blackwood?" Mason asked. "March, I believe. He mentioned expansion plans, requested some legal assistance with property matters." Blackwood glanced at Murphy. "As I explained to Mr. Murphy, I'm an attorney in Philadelphia specializing in property law." Murphy interrupted smoothly. "Mr. Blackwood has pressing business at the county recorder's office. We should be on our way if we hope to reach Tucson by nightfall." "Of course," Mason agreed easily, "though he might want to meet Miss Matthews first. She arrived yesterday from St. Louis, was engaged to marry your cousin." Blackwood's composure slipped momentarily. His gaze swept past Mason to where Rebecca stood across the street, the surprise in his expression genuine. "Thomas was engaged. He never mentioned—" He collected himself quickly. "How remiss of me. I should certainly meet the lady." Murphy placed a hand on Blackwood's arm. "Perhaps another time. The recorder's office closes early on Fridays." "Nonsense," Blackwood replied, gently removing Murphy's hand. "Family obligations come first. Thomas would have expected no less." He stepped around Murphy, heading toward Rebecca with determined strides. Rebecca moved forward to meet him, keenly aware of the shotgun partially concealed in her skirt. Up close, James Blackwood was even more convincing, his manner polished yet earnest, his blue eyes conveying appropriate sympathy. "Miss Matthews, my sincere condolences. I had no idea Thomas had found someone special." He extended his hand. "James Blackwood. I wish we were meeting under happier circumstances." Rebecca accepted the handshake, studying him carefully. "Strange that Thomas never mentioned you in his letters. He wrote quite explicitly about being raised in St. Matthew's orphanage, with no living relatives." Blackwood's smile faltered slightly. "Ah, well, our connection is somewhat complicated. My father was his mother's brother, but there was a family estrangement before Thomas was born. I only located him 3 years ago through a private investigator." "How convenient," Rebecca said, her voice cool. "And yet I have Thomas's orphanage certificate stating explicitly that both parents died with no known relatives. Issued in 1852. Murphy stepped closer, his hand moving toward his coat. "Mr. Blackwood, we really should—" "A moment, please." Blackwood interrupted, his gaze fixed on Rebecca. Miss Matthews, I understand your skepticism, but I assure you, my claim is legitimate. Perhaps Thomas chose not to mention our relationship for his own reasons. Perhaps, Rebecca agreed. Or perhaps you're not James Blackwood at all, but someone hired to impersonate a non-existent relative to claim valuable mining rights. Murphy's patience visibly snapped. That's enough. Blackwood, we're leaving. Now. His hand emerged from his coat, holding a revolver, not pointed directly at anyone, but clearly threatening. Mason moved with surprising speed, positioning himself between Rebecca and Murphy. Lower the weapon, Murphy. Drawing on a territorial officer is a hanging offense, Murphy sneered. 1 ranger against 6 of us? Poor odds, Garrett. Make that 2 against 6, came a new voice as Deputy Collins emerged from the alley beside Wallace's store, rifle raised. Sorry I'm late, Ranger. Found myself locked in jail somehow. The standoff held for a tense moment, Murphy and his 5 men facing Mason and Collins, with Rebecca and the bewildered James Blackwood caught between them. It was Wallace who broke the tension, stepping onto his store porch with a loaded shotgun. Make that 3 against 6, and Martha's got another scattergun aimed from her upstairs window. Murphy's cold calculation was visible on his face as he reassessed the situation. Slowly, he lowered his weapon. This isn't over, Garrett. Mr. Blackwood has legal documentation proving his claim. The territorial court will recognize his rights. Let's discuss those documents, Mason suggested. In particular, I'm curious about the boundary map you submitted with the claim filing, the one showing the Silver Crown's western border. James Blackwood frowned. Western border. The dispute was with the eastern property line, with Hargrove's. Claim. Murphy shot Blackwood with a warning look, but the damage was done. If the real Thomas had been in a boundary dispute with Hargrove to the east, but Murphy had filed paperwork about the western border, it suggested Murphy hadn't been fully honest with his hired imposter. Interesting slip, Mr. Blackwood, Mason said. Almost as if you and Murphy aren't working from the same script. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Blackwood's face. Mr. Murphy has been handling the technical details while I focused on the legal aspects. And what does Edward Hargrove think about your claim? Rebecca asked, since the eastern boundary dispute would affect his interests directly. Another look passed between Murphy and Blackwood, this one troubled on Blackwood's part, warning on Murphy's. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Hargrove yet, Blackwood replied carefully. Enough questions, Murphy snapped. Blackwood, you're coming with us to Tucson now. He gestured to his men, who moved their horses to surround the supposed Godzin. Mason made no move to intervene physically. The odds still favored Murphy's side, despite the additional defenders. Instead, he called out, Deputy Collins, send a telegram to Judge Wilson in Tucson. Inform him we're disputing the Blackwood claim filing and have evidence of fraudulent documentation. Murphy's expression darkened. You're making a mistake, Garrett. Powerful men have interests in these claims, powerful enough to arrange a convenient mudslide. Mason asked. A tense silence followed the accusation. Even Murphy's men shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. Finally, Murphy forced a laugh. You've been too long in the sun, Ranger. No man controls nature. He turned to Blackwood. Mount up. We've wasted enough time. One of Murphy's men brought forward a spare horse. Blackwood hesitated, looking between Murphy and Rebecca with clear indecision. For a moment, it seemed he might refuse to go, but ultimately he mounted the offered horse. Miss Matthews, he said, tipping his hat, I apologize for any distress my appearance has caused. I assure you my intentions are honorable, whatever the ranger might suggest. Rebecca met his gaze directly. If that's true, Mr. Blackwood, you should know that Thomas found something significant in the Silver Crown mine just before the mudslide. Something valuable enough that someone might have arranged his death to claim it. Blackwood's expression registered genuine shock. Arranged his death? You can't possibly think— Let's go, Murphy interrupted, spurring his horse forward. His men followed, practically dragging Blackwood's mount along with them. As the dust settled from their departure, Mason turned to Rebecca. "That wasn't James Blackwood." "Clearly not," she agreed. "But whoever he is, I don't think he knows the full extent of Murphy's plan. Did you see his reaction when I mentioned Thomas's death being arranged?" Mason nodded. "He's being used. A legitimate attorney hired to play a role without understanding the true stakes." He turned to Deputy Collins. "Send that telegram as mentioned. Then prepare to ride to Tucson. I want to know what paperwork they file and what judge they approach." The young deputy nodded and hurried toward the telegraph office. Wallace lowered his shotgun, approaching Rebecca and Mason. "Murphy won't let this go," the storekeeper warned. "He's invested too much in this scheme." "Agreed," Mason said. "Miss Matthews, our visit to Thomas's house has accelerated their timeline. You should prepare for Murphy to take more direct action." Rebecca gripped the shotgun more firmly. "What's our next step? We need to understand why the Silver Crown was worth killing for," Mason replied. "If Thomas found something valuable enough to die for, we need to know what it was." "The only person who might know would be the mine foreman," Wallace suggested. "Brian Turner. He survived the slide, was checking the ventilation system when it hit." "Where is he now?" Rebecca asked. "Working at Hargrove's mine," Wallace said. "Took the job when the Silver Crown was buried. Most miners who survived did the same. Not many employment options in these parts." Mason's expression darkened. "Turner went to work for the man who might have arranged his former employer's death?" "Man's got to eat," Wallace said with a shrug. "Besides, no one's proved Hargrove was behind what happened. Yet," Mason said grimly. "No one's proved it yet." Rebecca considered this new information. "We need to speak with Turner, find out what Thomas discovered before the slide." "Hargrove keeps his operation locked down tight," Mason warned. "Armed guards, restricted access. He claims it's to prevent claim jumpers, but it's excessive even by mining standards." "Then we'll need to meet Turner away from the mine," Rebecca said. "Where would a miner go when off duty?" Wallace snorted. "Same place all miners go, Lucky Strike Saloon. Turner's there most evenings from what I hear." Mason nodded. "Tonight, then, we approach Turner at the saloon." He glanced at Rebecca. "Though it's hardly a suitable place for a lady." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "My father's factory workers frequented establishments that would make your frontier saloon seem genteel by comparison. I'm familiar with such environments." A hint of a smile touched Mason's lips. "I don't doubt it, Miss Matthews. Still, we'll need to be cautious. If Hargrove has men watching Turner, our interest could put him in danger." As they discussed strategies for approaching the foreman, Timothy Wells burst from the telegraph office, waving a yellow paper. "Ranger Garrett, message. From Tucson." Mason took the telegram, his expression growing more serious as he read. "Judge Wilson was replaced yesterday, reassigned to Territorial Court in Prescott. His replacement is Judge Matheson." "Is that significant?" Rebecca asked. "Very." Matheson was Hargrove's attorney before receiving his appointment to the bench. Mason handed her the telegram. "This confirms high-level involvement. Someone's ensuring Murphy's claim receives favorable treatment." The implications were clear. They were facing not just Murphy and his men, but a conspiracy reaching into the territorial government itself. Rebecca felt a momentary flutter of fear, quickly replaced by determination. "They're trying to bury the truth along with the Silver Crown," she said. "We can't let that happen." Mason studied her resolute expression. "This isn't your fight, Rebecca. You could take the next stage east, return to St. Louis. No one would blame you." It was the first time he had used her given name. The formality between them slipping in this moment of gravity. Rebecca straightened her shoulders, meeting his concerned gaze. "I came west seeking a new beginning, Mason. I won't be driven away by men like Murphy and Hargrove." She gripped the shotgun Martha had given her with renewed purpose. Besides, Thomas deserves justice, and it seems you could use an ally who knows how to handle a scattergun. Something shifted in Mason's grey eyes. Respect mingled with concern, and perhaps something deeper he wasn't ready to acknowledge. He nodded once, accepting her decision. Tonight, then, we find Turner and discover what secret was worth burying an entire mine to keep hidden. The Lucky Strike Saloon had once been Silverdale's premier establishment, boasting carved woodwork, a polished mahogany bar imported from San Francisco, and a gilded mirror that reflected the prosperity of the boom years. Now, like the rest of the town, it bore the scars of disaster. The eastern wall had been rebuilt with mismatched lumber, the floor sloped where foundation timbers had shifted during the mudslide, and the once magnificent mirror was cracked from corner to corner. Still, it remained the social center of what was left of Silverdale. By 9 that evening, the saloon hummed with activity. Miners from the remaining operational claims, teamsters passing through on supply runs, and the handful of residents who hadn't fled after the disaster. Rebecca had changed into her most practical attire, a dark brown skirt and simple shirtwaist that wouldn't attract undue attention. She'd arranged her auburn hair in a no-nonsense knot and carried Martha's shotgun wrapped in a shawl. Before leaving the boarding house, she'd also retrieved her derringer from her trunk and secured it in a hidden pocket. Mason waited for her at the edge of the muddy street, his tall figure silhouetted against the golden light spilling from the saloon's windows. He wore his usual practical attire, but had added a dark vest that helped conceal his holstered Colt. "You're certain about this?" he asked as she approached. "Completely," Rebecca replied. "If Turner has information about what Thomas discovered, we need to hear it directly." Mason nodded, respect evident in his expression. "We'll present ourselves as travelers passing through, less suspicious than a territorial ranger asking direct questions. I've had Deputy Collins spread word that we left for Tucson earlier today. Do you think Turner will speak freely?" "Depends on how much he knows and how frightened he is." Mason's expression darkened. Working for Hargrove after Blackwood's death suggests either desperation or complicity. "Or perhaps he's gathering information from the inside," Rebecca suggested. "If he suspected foul play, he might have taken the position to learn the truth." The possibility hadn't occurred to Mason, judging by his surprised expression. "That's perceptive and possible." A faint smile touched his lips. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Matthews." "Rebecca," she corrected gently, "I believe we've moved beyond formalities, considering we've already been shot at together." His smile broadened momentarily. Rebecca, then, inside, the Lucky Strike, was hazy with tobacco smoke and loud with conversation and occasional bursts of laughter. A piano player in the corner pounded out a lively tune, competing with the general din. Heads turned briefly as they entered. A new face always attracted attention in a small town, especially one as attractive as Rebecca. But interest quickly faded when Mason's intimidating presence was noted. They made their way to a corner table with a good view of both the entrance and the bar. Mason positioned himself so his scarred side was less visible, a habitual movement Rebecca had begun to recognize. "Turner's at the bar," Mason murmured, gesturing with his chin toward a stocky man in his 40s with a close-cropped beard and the powerful shoulders of a career miner. Blue shirt, drinking alone. Rebecca studied the man discreetly. "Brian." Turner had the weathered complexion of someone who spent more time underground than in sunlight, but his eyes were alert and intelligent as they scanned the room with regular frequency. He nursed his whiskey slowly, another sign of a careful man. "How should we approach him?" she asked. "Directly but carefully. Wait for my signal." Mason rose and made his way to the bar, positioning himself near Turner without immediately engaging him. Rebecca watched as Mason ordered drinks. his body, language deliberately casual despite his natural vigilance. After a few minutes, Mason struck up what appeared to be casual conversation with Turner. The miner seemed guarded at first, but gradually relaxed as Mason maintained his role as a passing traveler. Eventually, Mason gestured toward their table, and Turner, after a moment's hesitation, nodded and followed him back. Brian Turner. "This is Rebecca Matthews," Mason said as they reached the table. "My traveling companion." Turner removed his cap politely. "Ma'am," his voice was gruff but not unfriendly, "your husband says you're passing through on your way to California." Rebecca noted the fabricated relationship without missing a beat. "That's right. Though what we've seen of Silverdale makes me wonder if there might be opportunities here despite the recent disaster." Turner's expression darkened. "Not much opportunity left in this town, ma'am. Not since the slide. You worked the mines here." "Before, I understand?" Mason asked, his tone conversational. "Silver Crown," Turner confirmed, taking a seat with his back to the wall, a position that allowed him to watch the room. "Foreman for Mr. Blackwood going on 3 years. Silver Crown," Mason repeated thoughtfully. "That's the one that got buried, isn't it? Heard some talk about it being a rich strike before the disaster." Turner took a careful sip of whiskey, his eyes wary above the glass. "Rich enough. Nothing spectacular." Rebecca leaned forward slightly. "That's not what we heard in Tucson. A gentleman at our hotel mentioned Thomas Blackwood had made a significant discovery just before the slide. Something that had Edward Hargrove worried." The change in Turner was immediate, his body tensed, his gaze darting toward the door. "Don't know anything about that," he said, his voice lower. "And if you're smart, you won't ask about it neither." Mason's demeanor shifted subtly. Gone was the casual traveler, replaced by the focused intensity of the Texas Ranger. "We know about the boundary dispute, Turner, and about Blackwood's unfinished letter mentioning threats from Hargrove." Turner set his glass down carefully. "You're not travelers. It wasn't a question. I'm Territorial Ranger Mason Garrett. This is Rebecca Matthews, who came to marry Thomas Blackwood only to find him missing and the town half buried." The miner's weathered face registered surprise, then understanding. "The mail-order bride. Blackwood mentioned you were coming." He studied Rebecca with new interest. "He was looking forward to your arrival, ma'am. Fixed up his house real nice." A lump formed in Rebecca's throat at this confirmation of Thomas's genuine intentions. "Thank you for telling me that, Mr. Turner." Turner glanced around the saloon, then leaned closer. "You shouldn't be asking these questions, not here, not anywhere. In Silverdale, people died in that mudslide," Mason said quietly, "including your boss. Don't you want to know if it was truly an accident?" Turner's expression hardened. "Course I do. 17 of my men are still buried under 30 feet of mud. Best crew I ever worked with." He took another careful sip of whiskey. "But knowing and proving are different things, and asking questions gets people killed." "You're afraid of Hargrove," Rebecca observed. "Any sane person would be." Turner's voice was barely audible now. "Man's got half the county officials in his pocket and gunmen on his payroll. Since the slide, he's been untouchable." "What did Thomas find in the Silver Crown?" Mason pressed. "What was valuable enough to kill for?" Turner hesitated. Internal conflict visible on his face. Finally, he reached into his shirt and withdrew a small leather pouch. Glancing around once more, he carefully extracted something and placed it on the table between them, concealing the item with his broad hand. "This is why," he said, lifting his palm to reveal a rough stone about the size of a small grape. Rebecca leaned closer, confused. The stone was unremarkable, greyish with faint crystal structures visible on one broken edge. "I don't understand," she admitted. "It looks like ordinary quartz." Turner's laugh was without humour. Not quartz, ma'am, diamond, uncut, unpolished, but a diamond sure as I'm sitting here. Mason's expression registered disbelief. Diamonds? In a silver mine? Not in the silver vein, Turner clarified. In a separate formation we discovered while expanding the east shaft, the one that Hargrove claimed was on his property. We hit a pipe of blue-grey kimberlite, just like they found in South Africa. He tapped the rough stone. This was just a sample. Blackwood had a whole pouch of them by the time he sent for a geology expert from Denver. That's why the boundary dispute mattered, Rebecca realized. The diamond pipe crossed from Thomas's claim into Hargrove's. Turner nodded. Blackwood found survey markers that had been moved, proof that Hargrove had shifted the boundary stakes to claim more land. With the original survey, most of the kimberlite pipe would be on the Silver Crown property. Did the geology expert confirm the diamonds were valuable? Mason asked. Never got the chance to arrive. Turner's voice grew heavy. 3 days after Blackwood sent the telegram to Denver, the rains came. Then the mudslide. He pocketed the rough diamond. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? The implications were staggering. Diamonds in Arizona territory would create a rush to rival the California gold strikes. Whoever controlled the claims would amass a fortune that would make silver mining seem trivial by comparison. How many people knew about the discovery? Rebecca asked. Just me, Blackwood, and his new assistant, a fellow named Carson. Turner's expression grew troubled. Carson disappeared right before the slide. Thought he died in it until I saw him working as Hargrove's personal secretary last month. Mason and Rebecca exchanged glances. Carson betrayed Thomas, she said, softly. Told Hargrove about the diamonds. That would be my guess, Turner agreed. Though how they arranged the mudslide. He shook his head. Nature did the work, but someone gave it a helping hand. The deforested slopes, Rebecca remembered Martha mentioning the mining operations, removing too many trees. If someone deliberately cleared the mountainside above the mine, and then used explosives during the heavy rains, Mason continued, they could have triggered the slide precisely where they wanted it. Turner nodded grimly. That's been my thinking. Been watching Hargrove's operation, looking for signs they're searching for the diamond pipe on their side of the boundary. So far they're proceeding normally with silver extraction, but Carson's been making surveys on the eastern slopes. They're planning to claim they made the discovery independently, Rebecca concluded. Once the Silver Crown claim reverts to public domain or gets acquired by Murphy's fictional cousin, Mason added. That's why the paperwork and legal maneuvering. They need to establish ownership before announcing any diamond discoveries. Turner drained his whiskey. I've said more than is safe already. Hargrove has eyes everywhere. As if summoned by the words, the saloon's doors swung open to admit 3 rough-looking men wearing the dust of a hard ride. Though not in uniform, they carried themselves with the unmistakable arrogance of hired guns. Their gaze swept the room methodically before settling on Turner. Trouble, Mason muttered, shifting slightly to better access his weapon. Hargrove's men. Turner's face paled. They shouldn't be here. They've been watching me. The largest of the 3 newcomers approached their table directly. Turner, he growled. Boss wants to see you. Now. I'm off duty, Wilson, Turner replied, struggling to maintain composure. Tell Hargrove I'll report at my regular shift tomorrow. Wilson's hand moved to rest on his holstered revolver. Wasn't asking, Turner. And your new friends are invited too. His cold gaze shifted to Mason. Especially the ranger who's supposed to be in Tucson right now. Mason remained seemingly relaxed, though Rebecca noted the subtle shift in his posture, the coiled tension of a man preparing for violence. This is a private conversation. Suggest you and your friends continue to the bar. Wilson sneered. Not happening, Garrett. Boss is real interested in why a territorial ranger is asking questions about the Silver Crown. His gaze shifted to Rebecca. and why Blackwood's mail-order bride hasn't left town yet. The atmosphere in the saloon had changed. Conversations quieted as patrons sensed impending trouble. The piano player stopped mid-song, the sudden silence highlighting the tension. "I don't work for Hargrove after hours," Turner said, finding courage. "And neither do these folks." Wilson's face darkened. "Last chance, Turner. You either come willingly or we drag you out." "That won't be happening," Mason said quietly, his hand now resting near his holstered Colt. "Miss Matthews and I have business. With Mr. Turner, your boss can wait." The standoff stretched for several heartbeats. Rebecca slowly moved her hand toward the wrapped shotgun beside her chair, painfully aware that violence could erupt at any moment. Wilson's decision came suddenly. He reached for his weapon, but Mason moved with practiced speed, drawing and cocking, his Colt in one fluid motion. Wilson froze, the barrel of Mason's revolver now inches from his face. "Reconsider," Mason suggested calmly. The other two gunmen had drawn their weapons, creating a deadly triangle. Rebecca unwrapped the shotgun and raised it in one smooth movement, aiming at the nearest of Wilson's companions. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "this weapon fires 12 buckshot pellets with each barrel. At this range, I couldn't possibly miss. Shall we all reconsider our positions?" The tableau held for what seemed an eternity. Mason's revolver trained on Wilson, Rebecca's shotgun covering his compatriots, and Turner looking as if he wished the floor would open and swallow him whole. It was the saloon keeper who broke the impasse, emerging from behind the bar with a greener 12 gauge. "Take it outside or holster them," he ordered. "We've already rebuilt this place once after the slide. Won't do it again because of Hargrove's business." Wilson weighed his options, clearly recognizing the disadvantage. Slowly, he raised his hands. "This ain't over, Garrett. Hargrove doesn't appreciate people interfering in his affairs." "Neither do I," Mason replied evenly. "Now back away, nice and slow." The three gunmen retreated, keeping their eyes on Mason and Rebecca as they withdrew from the saloon. Through the windows, Rebecca watched them mount their horses and ride east, toward Hargrove's property. "They'll report to Hargrove," Turner said, his voice strained. "He'll know I've been talking to you." "You can't go back to the mine," Mason confirmed, holstering his weapon. "That would be suicide." "Where can I go? If not the mine, then Murphy's men will find me in town. There's nowhere safe in Silverdale anymore." Rebecca exchanged glances with Mason. "Martha mentioned a line cabin on the Silver Crown property," she suggested. "In Harris Canyon, said it was stocked with supplies." Mason nodded. "That could work temporarily, remote enough to avoid immediate discovery." Turner still looked uncertain. "And then what? I can't hide forever. Hargrove controls everything within 50 miles. "Not forever," Mason assured him. "Just long enough for us to gather evidence and contact the territorial governor directly. With proof of diamonds and the boundary tampering, we can bypass the corrupted local officials." "What about the diamonds Thomas already collected?" Rebecca asked Turner. "Did he keep them at the house?" Turner shook his head. "Too valuable. He had a special safe installed at the assay office in town. Only he knew the combination." He hesitated. "Though there was a letter. He mentioned writing down the combination and hiding it somewhere only his bride would think to look." Rebecca's pulse quickened. "A place only I would know to look?" "That's what he said. Figured his private papers would be safe with his future wife." Mason rose decisively. "We need to move quickly. Wilson and his friends will return with reinforcements." He turned to Rebecca. "We'll take Turner to the line cabin, then return to town for those diamonds. If we can secure Thomas's samples as evidence, we'll have leverage against Hargrove." They left through the saloon's back door, moving swiftly through the darkened town toward the boarding house. Martha was waiting, somehow already aware of the confrontation at the saloon. "News travels fast," she explained, seeing their surprised expressions. Timothy Wells was in the saloon, came running as soon as the guns came out. She handed Mason a bulging saddlebag. More provisions. The cabin hasn't been stocked since before the slide. Rebecca hugged the older woman impulsively. "Thank you for everything, Martha. Just find the truth about Thomas," the widow replied fiercely. "That's thanks enough." Their horses were saddled and waiting behind the boarding house. Within minutes, they were riding north out of town, Turner mounted behind Mason on his gelding. The night was clear, stars providing enough light to follow. The trail without lanterns that might give away their position. "Harris Canyon is about 5 miles north," Turner directed as they cleared the town limits. "Follow the creek bed until it narrows between granite walls." They rode in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Rebecca found herself reviewing Thomas's letters, searching her memory for any clue about where he might have hidden the safe combination. A place only his bride would think to look suggested something connected to their correspondence or shared interests. The canyon appeared as a darker shadow against the night sky, a narrow defile cutting into the foothills, north of Silverdale. The creek that had once flowed vigorously was now reduced to a trickle in the summer heat, though pools remained in deeper sections. "There," Turner pointed to a small structure nestled against the canyon wall, nearly invisible among the juniper. Trees surrounding it. The line cabin. The cabin was small but solidly built, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table and chairs, and 2 narrow bunks built into the walls. Shelves held basic provisions, beans, coffee, flour, and other staples sealed in metal canisters to protect them from rodents. "It's not much," Turner acknowledged, "but it's defensible. Only one approach, good sight lines, and there's a spring in the back that provides fresh water." Mason inspected the surroundings with a ranger's eye for strategic positions. "It'll do. For now, we'll leave you the provisions Martha packed." He handed Turner his spare revolver, just in case. Turner accepted the weapon with a nod of thanks. "What's your plan now?" "Return to town and search for those diamonds," Mason replied. "If Blackwood hid the safe combination somewhere in his house—" "Not the house," Rebecca interrupted, a memory suddenly crystallizing. "In his 10th letter, Thomas mentioned hiding. A surprise for me in the book he sent, a copy of Tennyson's poems. He said it was safeguarding our future together." Mason looked impressed. "The book would have been delivered to you in St. Louis. Would have avoided any risk of the information being found if his house was searched." Rebecca nodded excitedly. "The book is in my trunk at the boarding house. I never opened it. There was so much happening when I arrived, and I'd planned to read it once I was settled." "Then we return to the boarding house," Mason decided. "Find the book, locate the combination, and retrieve the diamonds before Hargrove realizes what we're doing." As they prepared to leave, Turner gripped Mason's arm. "Be careful. Hargrove won't stop now that he knows you're investigating, and if Murphy learns you're still in town—" "We'll move quickly," Mason assured him. "Stay hidden. Keep watch. We'll return as soon as we have the evidence." The ride back to Silverdale was tense, both of them acutely aware that Hargrove's men could be searching for them already. They approached town from the west, using the shadows of abandoned buildings for cover as they made their way to the boarding house. Martha met them at the back door, her expression grave. "Hargrove's men were here asking questions. They left just an hour ago." "Did they search my room?" Rebecca asked urgently. "Tried to. I ran them off with the scattergun." Martha's eyes gleamed with fierce satisfaction. "Told them no man enters a lady's room in my house without proper invitation." "We need to retrieve something from my trunk," Rebecca explained. "A book that may contain information about diamonds." Thomas discovered. Martha's eyes widened. "Diamonds, not silver." "Both," Mason confirmed. "The diamonds are why Thomas was killed and the mine buried. We need to find the samples he collected as evidence." "Then you'd best hurry," Martha urged. "Those men promised to return with official papers, said Judge Matheson would sign a search warrant by morning." Rebecca rushed upstairs to her room, Mason following close behind. Her trunk stood untouched at the foot of the narrow bed. She unlocked it quickly, pushing aside carefully folded clothing until she found the book, a handsome leather-bound volume of Tennyson's collected works. "This is it," she said, holding it reverently. The book represented Thomas's final communication. To her, a message he'd never expected would be delivered in his absence. Opening the cover, she discovered a folded paper tucked inside the frontispiece. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it, revealing Thomas's familiar handwriting. "My dearest Rebecca," she read aloud, "if you are reading this, we have finally met, and you have accepted my humble gift. Inside you'll find I've marked certain passages that speak to my feelings about our future together. More practically, you'll find the numbers 18, 42, 7, 33 marked throughout. These will open the future I've secured for us at Hammond's assay office. With deepest affection, Thomas." "The safe combination," Mason confirmed, "disguised as page numbers or poetry references." Rebecca leafed through the book, finding small pencil marks beside the numbers mentioned. He was thorough in his planning. "Hammond's office is on the north side of town," Mason said. "Still standing, though Hammond himself left after the slide. We should go tonight, before Hargrove can secure that search warrant." As they prepared to leave, Martha pressed a small parcel of food into Rebecca's hands. "For strength," she said, simply, "and take the back roads, main streets being watched." Outside, the night had grown overcast, a blessing that provided additional concealment as they made their way through Silverdale's shadowed streets. The assay office, a sturdy brick building designed to resist both fire and theft, stood dark. "And silent, side door," Mason whispered, leading Rebecca around the building. The lock yielded to his skilled manipulation, allowing them entry without forced breaking. Inside, the office was layered with dust and silence. Navigational equipment, scales and testing chemicals remained in place, abandoned when the owner fled the dying town. The safe stood behind the counter, a substantial iron box with a combination dial gleaming dully in the faint light from Mason's shuttered lantern. Rebecca consulted the paper again. 1842-733, she recited, as Mason turned the dial with careful precision. The safe door swung open with a protestingly metallic groan. Inside, among various papers and small bags of ore samples, sat a velvet pouch secured with a drawstring. Mason retrieved it, opening it carefully to reveal 24 rough diamonds of varying sizes, the physical evidence of Thomas's discovery and the motive for murder. "We have it!" Rebecca breathed, relief washing through her. "Proof of everything Turner told us." Before Mason could respond, the unmistakable sound of a revolver being cocked broke the silence. "I'll take those now," came a cold voice from the doorway. "You've saved me considerable trouble finding them." They turned to find Edward Hargrove himself, standing in the office doorway, revolver aimed steadily at Mason's chest. Behind him loomed the familiar figures of Wilson and another gunman. "Diamonds in Arizona territory," Hargrove continued, stepping forward into the lantern light. "Quite the discovery. Worth killing for, wouldn't you agree, Ranger Garrett?" "How did you find us?" Mason asked, his voice calm despite the revolver aimed at his chest. He made no move toward his own weapon, acutely aware of the additional gunman flanking Hargrove. The mine owner smiled thinly. "Carson noticed Turner speaking with you at the saloon. After my men reported your disagreement, it wasn't difficult to determine what you might be seeking." He gestured with his revolver toward the velvet pouch. "The diamonds, if you please." Rebecca's mind raced, calculating angles and distances. Mason stood between her and Hargrove, partially shielding her from direct fire. Her shotgun leaned against the counter, out of immediate reach, but her derringer remained hidden in her pocket. "These diamonds were discovered on Thomas Blackwood's legal claim," she said, buying time. "A claim you've been trying to steal through. Boundary manipulation." Hargrove's cold gaze shifted to her. "An accusation that would require proof and witnesses, Miss Matthews, neither of which will leave this building." He stepped forward, extending his free hand. "The diamonds. Now." Mason slowly reached toward the velvet pouch, his movements deliberate. Rebecca recognized the technique, drawing attention to his hands while creating opportunity for sudden movement. She tensed, ready to act when he did. "You won't escape justice, Hargrove," Mason said. "The territorial governor is fully invested." "In my mining operations," Hargrove interrupted. "Who do you think appointed Judge Matheson? Arizona Territory runs on Silver Ranger. The governor won't risk that flow of wealth for a dead mine owner and some ethical concerns about claim boundaries." "And the mudslide?" Rebecca asked. "Was that the governor's idea too?" Something flickered in Hargrove's eyes, caution perhaps, or surprise at her directness. "Natural disaster, unfortunate, but not uncommon in mining country, especially when operations remove supporting timber from mountainsides." "With explosive assistance," Mason added, still holding the pouch without surrendering it. "Turner told us everything, Hargrove. How Carson betrayed Blackwood, how the mountainside was deliberately weakened, how your men set charges during the rainstorm." Hargrove's expression hardened. "Turner should have accepted my generous offer instead of running to you, an unfortunate decision that will cost him his life." He cocked his revolver. "Last chance, Garrett. The diamonds, or I put a bullet through. You and take them anyway." Mason's hand tightened on the pouch. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant howl of a coyote somewhere in the hills beyond Silverdale. Rebecca moved suddenly, her voice sharp. "Mason, down!" Years of ranger training made Mason react instinctively. He dropped to one knee as Rebecca pulled her derringer and fired in a single fluid motion. Her small-caliber bullet struck Hargrove's shoulder, spinning him sideways. His shot went wild, splintering wood above Mason's head. Mason's Colt appeared in his hand, as if by magic, firing twice before Wilson could react. The gunman crashed backward through the doorway. The second man managed one shot, a bullet that creased Mason's temple, before Mason's return fire struck him center mass. Hargrove scrambled for the door, blood streaming from his shoulder wound. Rebecca lunged for her shotgun, raising it just as Hargrove reached the threshold. "Stop or I'll fire," she commanded, aiming both barrels at his back. The mine owner froze, calculation visible in his posture even as he clutched his bleeding shoulder. "You won't shoot an unarmed man in the back, Miss Matthews. You're not that kind of person." "You murdered Thomas and 17 miners," Rebecca replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You buried an entire mine to hide your crimes. I'm exactly the kind of person who would stop you from escaping justice." Mason rose, blood trickling from the graze on his temple. "It's over, Hargrove. The territorial governor may be in your pocket, but diamonds in Arizona Territory will bring federal attention no amount of corruption can deflect." A new voice joined, the conversation from the darkened street. "He's right about that, Edward." Luke Murphy stepped into view, revolver in hand. For a heartbeat, Rebecca thought he had come to Hargrove's aid, until she saw he was aiming at the mine owner, not at them. "Murphy!" Hargrove spat. "What is this? We had an agreement." Murphy's cold smile held no warmth. "We did. You would provide legal cover for my acquisition of the Silver Crown claim, and I would ensure no one questioned your activities." He glanced at the diamonds Mason still held. "You never mentioned these, Edward. Quite an oversight in our partnership." Understanding dawned on Rebecca. "You're not working together, you're competitors." "Temporary allies of convenience," Murphy corrected, "until I learned what Edward was really after." He gestured with his revolver. "Step back inside, Hargrove. We have matters to discuss." Mason shifted subtly, positioning himself to cover both Hargrove and Murphy. "This changes nothing, Murphy. You're both facing charges for fraud and murder." Murphy's laugh was genuinely amused. "With what authority, Ranger? Judge Matheson won't issue warrants against us. The local sheriff is on Hargrove's payroll, and the territorial governor won't help either of you once federal authorities learn about diamond deposits in Arizona," came another new voice. Deputy Collins appeared from the shadows across the street, rifle raised. Behind him stood Wallace from the general store, and most surprisingly, the man who had posed as James Blackwood, now holding a revolver with the confidence of someone familiar with weapons. "Federal Marshal Alan Pierce," the former imposter announced, displaying a badge that glinted in the moonlight. "Undercover investigation into corruption in territorial mining operations. Mr. Murphy, lower your weapon." Murphy's expression registered shock, then calculation. His revolver wavered, but didn't. "Lower. 6 guns against 2, Mason observed quietly. "Poor odds, gentlemen." A tense silence followed, broken when Hargrove suddenly lunged toward Murphy. "You betrayed me," he snarled, his wounded shoulder apparently forgotten in his rage. Murphy's revolver discharged, the sound deafening in the confined space. Hargrove staggered, clutching his chest, then collapsed in the doorway. In the chaos that followed, Marshal Pierce and Deputy Collins rushed forward, weapons trained on Murphy. The claim jumper recognized his position was untenable, and slowly lowered his weapon. "Smart decision," Marshal Pierce said, relieving Murphy of his revolver. "Though shooting Hargrove didn't improve your situation." "Self-defense," Murphy replied smoothly. "He attacked me. Everyone saw it." Rebecca kept her shotgun trained on Murphy while Mason checked Hargrove. The mine owner was still breathing, but blood bubbled from his lips with each labored breath. "He needs a doctor," Mason announced, "though I doubt he'll survive long enough for treatment." "Get Doc Wilson," Deputy Collins ordered Wallace. "Even if it's hopeless, we'll do this properly." As Wallace hurried away, Marshal Pierce formally arrested. "Murphy? Luke Murphy, you're under federal custody for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Additional charges pending." Murphy's confident demeanor finally cracked. "This is territorial business, not federal. You have no jurisdiction here." "Diamond deposits on federal land create federal jurisdiction," Pierce replied. "I've been trailing you since your land fraud schemes in Colorado last year. The Silver Crown case finally gave us the evidence we needed." Rebecca lowered her shotgun as Deputy Collins secured Murphy's wrists with handcuffs. "You were pretending to be James Blackwood," she said to Pierce. "Why play along with Murphy's scheme?" The marshal smiled wryly. "Needed to understand the full extent of the conspiracy. When Murphy approached me in Philadelphia with his proposal, impersonate a fictional heir to claim valuable mining property, I saw an opportunity to infiltrate his operation." "You could have revealed yourself earlier," Mason pointed out, pressing a handkerchief to his bleeding temple. "Before Hargrove confronted us." "Couldn't risk it," Pierce replied. "Wasn't certain who was corrupted in local law enforcement. Needed to verify Deputy Collins was trustworthy first." Collins nodded. "Marshall contacted me this afternoon after Murphy left for Tucson. We've been monitoring the situation, waiting for an opportunity to catch both Hargrove and Murphy together." Rebecca knelt beside Hargrove, whose breathing had grown more labored. The mine owner's eyes focused on her, recognition and hatred mingling in his gaze. "Why kill Thomas?" she asked softly. "You were already wealthy from silver. Why not simply offer to buy his claim legitimately?" Hargrove coughed, blood staining his lips. "Blackwood wouldn't sell." His voice was barely audible. "Too principled. Diamonds would have made him powerful. Couldn't allow." His words trailed off as his eyes glazed over. "He's gone," Mason confirmed after checking for a pulse. Marshal Pierce sighed. "Convenient for him, perhaps. Saved himself from hanging." He turned to Rebecca. And Mason. The diamonds are evidence now. I'll need to take them into federal custody. Mason handed over the velvet pouch. What happens to the Silver Crown claim? With Thomas dead and no legitimate heir, federal mining law is clear. Pierce replied. In cases where the claim holder dies without heirs, the property reverts to public domain after 1 year, unless a legitimate business partner can establish continuity of operations. Rebecca's pulse quickened as she glanced at Mason. Thomas's letters mentioned seeking investors for expansion. He was preparing legal documents when the slide occurred. Mason caught her meaning immediately. The unfinished letter in his office. He was explaining business developments to you before your arrival. As his intended wife, you might have a claim to partnership interest. Marshal Pierce considered this. It's possible with proper documentation and testimony. Mining law recognizes spousal inheritance rights, and intended marriage with documented business discussions could establish standing. He smiled slightly. I'm not a judge, but I'd say you have a case, Miss Matthews. By dawn, Silverdale had undergone a transformation. Federal marshals, summoned by telegraph from Tucson, arrived to take Murphy into custody. Doc Wilson confirmed Hargrove's death and arranged for the body to be transported to the county seat for official processing. Deputy Collins and Wallace organized a town meeting to explain the night's events. Rebecca and Mason, exhausted but triumphant, sat on the boarding house porch as sunrise painted the eastern sky in shades of gold and crimson. Martha had tended. Mason's head wound, just a crease, but head wounds always bleed dramatic, and provided them with coffee strong enough to revive the dead. What happens now? Rebecca asked softly. With the diamonds, the claim, everything? Mason sipped his coffee thoughtfully. Federal authorities will investigate fully. The diamond deposit will likely create a new mining boom once word gets out. As for the Silver Crown claim, he glanced at her, Marshal Pierce believes you have legal standing to pursue ownership. With proper representation, you could secure Thomas's legacy. Rebecca considered this unexpected possibility. I came to marry Thomas, not to claim his property. True, Mason acknowledged, but perhaps honoring his vision for the Silver Crown is a way to honor his memory. He wanted to build something lasting, something that would provide for both of you. The mention of both of you hung in the air between them, highlighting how circumstances had changed since Rebecca's arrival in Silverdale just days earlier. You've been thinking about rebuilding the mine, she observed, noting the careful consideration in his expression. Mason nodded slowly. With federal oversight to ensure safety and proper engineering to prevent another slide. The silver operation was profitable even before the diamond discovery. With both resources, he trailed off, aware he might be overstepping. It would require a knowledgeable partner, Rebecca said. Someone familiar with mining operations, with connections in the territory. Someone trustworthy. Their eyes met, unspoken possibilities passing between them. After a moment, Mason set down his coffee cup. Rebecca, he began carefully, I'm not Thomas Blackwood. I don't have his education or refinement. What I offer wouldn't be the life he promised you. No, she agreed softly. It would be different, but perhaps more honest from the beginning. She reached out, gently touching the scar on his cheek. We've faced danger together, Mason. Discovered truths together. That creates a foundation more solid than years of letters could build. His hand covered hers, warm and strong. Are you proposing a business partnership, Miss Matthews? A smile played at the corners of his mouth. Or something more? Perhaps both, she replied. A partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. The rest, she returned his smile. The rest we can discover together without rushing. The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Turner rode into view, accompanied by Marshal Pierce. The mine foreman looked exhausted, but relieved to see them. "Heard the news," he called as he dismounted. "Hargrove dead, Murphy arrested. Hardly believed it until the marshal here confirmed everything." Pierce dismounted more gracefully. "Mr. Turner has provided valuable testimony about the Silver Crown, operations, and Thomas Blackwood's discovery. His knowledge of the diamond deposit will be essential to any future development." Rebecca stood to greet them. "You're safe now, Mr. Turner. Your loyalty to Thomas won't go unrecognized." Turner removed his cap, twisting it in his hands. "Much obliged, ma'am, though I'm still not sure what happens next. With the mine buried and ownership uncertain—" "Perhaps not as uncertain as you might think," Marshal Pierce interjected. "I've been reviewing territorial mining statutes. With Miss Matthews potentially establishing partnership interest through her relationship with Blackwood, and Mr. Garrett's previous employment as mine foreman establishing operational knowledge, there could be grounds for a continuity claim." Mason raised an eyebrow. "You seem unusually invested in the resolution, Marshal," Pierce smiled. "The federal government has significant interest in ensuring any diamond deposits are developed properly and legally. Having trustworthy operators would be preferable to opening a claim rush that could destabilize the entire territory." "Are you offering federal support for our potential claim?" Rebecca asked directly. "Let's call it federal interest in an orderly transition," Pierce replied. "With appropriate oversight, of course." Turner looked between them, understanding dawning on his weathered face. "You two are considering reopening the Silver Crown?" Mason glanced at Rebecca, letting her take the lead in answering. "We're considering honoring Thomas Blackwood's legacy," she said carefully, "creating something that reflects his vision while acknowledging the reality of what happened here." She met Mason's gaze. With the right partners, it could be something remarkable. "I'd be proud to serve as foreman again," Turner said immediately. "Already know where to find good miners who'd return if the operation was sound." Marshal Pierce nodded approvingly. "I'll expedite the necessary paperwork in Tucson. Federal Mining Commissioner arrives next week to assess the diamond situation. Having a proposal in place before then would be advantageous." After the Marshal and Turner departed to make arrangements, Rebecca and Mason found themselves alone again on the porch. The town was coming alive around them, citizens emerging to face the day with new knowledge about Silverdale's tragedy and potential rebirth. "It won't be easy," Mason cautioned. "Rebuilding the mine, establishing legitimate operations, managing federal oversight, not the simple married life you came west expecting." Rebecca laughed softly. "I came west seeking a new beginning, Mason. The form that beginning takes has changed, but the essence remains the same, building something meaningful in a place where I can define my own path." She gazed out at the mud-scarred town. "Silverdale needs rebuilding. The Silver Crown needs redemption from the tragedy that buried it. And she met his eyes. "I need a purpose worthy of the journey. And a partner worthy of your courage." He added quietly, "I believe I've found one," she replied. "Though he's considerably more scarred and taciturn than advertised in the letters." A genuine smile transformed Mason's face, softening the hard lines and bringing warmth to his grey eyes. "I'm not much for writing letters," he admitted, "but I'm good at keeping promises, Rebecca Matthews. That's what matters in the end," she said. "Not elegant words or refined manners, but steadfast action when challenges arise." As morning light spread across Silverdale, Rebecca contemplated the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She had arrived seeking a husband and found a devastated town. She had expected security through marriage and instead discovered her own strength in confronting danger. She had lost Thomas Blackwood before ever meeting him, yet found a different kind of partnership with a scarred ranger who matched her courage with his own. "What are you thinking?" Mason asked, watching her thoughtful expression. "That life rarely "Delivers what we expect," she replied. "Sometimes it delivers what we need instead." He nodded, understanding perfectly. "Sometimes a mudslide buries one future but uncovers another." Rebecca smiled at the apt metaphor. "Exactly. The Silver Crown is buried, but its legacy and Thomas's can rise again. Different than planned, but perhaps stronger for having weathered the storm." Mason stood, offering her his hand. "Then let's begin, Miss Matthews. We have a mine to reclaim, diamonds to uncover, and a town to rebuild." Rebecca placed her hand in his, feeling the strength and promise in his grip. "Together, Ranger Garrett." "Together," he agreed. As they walked down the steps toward Silverdale's main street, Rebecca felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The mail-order bride who had arrived to Devastation had found her place after all, not as Thomas Blackwood's wife, but as her own woman, making her own choices, building her own future in partnership with a man who valued her strength as much as her companionship. The mud-buried town would rise again. The diamond deposit would create new prosperity, and Rebecca Matthews, who had traveled 2,000 miles seeking a husband, had found something more valuable: her own power to shape destiny from disaster, with a protector who had become a partner in every sense that mattered. Behind them, Martha Simmons watched from the boarding house doorway, a satisfied smile on her face. "Thomas would approve," she murmured to herself. "He always did appreciate a happy ending, especially one with diamonds involved." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.